Welcome to the Too Busy to Eat show. I'm Greg Zuffalato, the host of the show, and also the founder of Too Busy to Eat, the protein bar company. Today, we have a fascinating guest, Dr. Andrew Miles. Dr. Miles has spent years, he's actually been in China studying. He's studied Chinese medicine and really the science connected to Chinese medicine and modern medicine that we think about in the U.S. and seeing how they work together and which ones are more effective for certain treatments. He's got a vast experience starting at a very young age understanding Chinese medicine and has a great information on stress and has worked with some of the busiest people in the world and helping them stay healthy and energized and active. So Dr. Miles is a great interview. Before the interview, I want you to check out toobusytoeat.com. Check out our products. Let us know how you think. If you want to try them out, which I really encourage you to do, they're low carb, gluten-free, low 1 gram of sugar protein bars. So check them out. Use the coupon code TBTE show, and get a 20% discount off your first order. Now, let's get to Dr. Miles. Well, welcome, Dr. Miles. I'm very excited to have you on the show. It was so interesting reading about your background. So thanks for taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And I know, as you mentioned, you're in a really busy season, so this is a perfect time, the Too Busy to Eat show.
Absolutely. In the last few days, we have literally been too busy to eat. We always dream about having a consistent schedule, but the way that life goes, sometimes it's not always possible.
Correct. Yep. Sometimes things like life happens. Yes, that's true. So I had the privilege of getting to know you through, reading about you. Why don't you let us know a little bit more about your journey that you took to get you to where you are today?
Okay. Well, it actually goes way back to when I was 12 years old. I had a Chinese stepdad, and that's when I was exposed to a lot of Chinese culture, and had my first exposure to Chinese medicines. A little bit after that, I started learning Chinese martial arts. So from the time I was 15, I was setting wrists or using different herbal liniments, this kind of thing. Yeah. And I was learning Chinese medicine as part of my martial arts education, kind of out of necessity, because as you're getting beat up, you need to learn how to fix yourself and your training partners. Yeah. Then I went to school for it, professionally in British Columbia. For a 5-year program, and then afterwards did advanced study in China. Wow. Yeah. Came back to Oregon, had a clinic. During that time in China, I acquired some mentors who are very wealthy businessmen. Mm-hmm. And one of them was talking to me and he said, "How's the clinic going?" I said, "Oh, great. People are flying in from out of state. It's wonderful." And he said, "Well, when are you going to stop being so selfish?" I was like, "What? No, I'm a good person." He's like, "How many people are you hiring?" Yeah. I said, "No, it's just a mom and pop operation." So he said, "So basically you've taken all the advantages that we've given you, other people have given you, and you're not giving anybody else a hand up." And then I said, "Yeah, that's about right." He said, "You know what? You're doing well. So you have 2 weeks to close your dream clinic. Wow. And then spend the next 3 years following us and learning what it really is to be effective." And I spent the next few years, I would go to lunch and I might not know if we were just going to lunch or if we were going to randomly fly to another province. Oh my gosh. So I lived out of a suitcase. Like a handbag, basically. It's one of these little Toomey carry-ons. Sure. I lived out of that for a few years. And the pace of life was absolutely, it's insane unless you know how to adjust and how to make the best of those chaotic situations. Yeah. So that was trial by fire.
That is trial. Now, so that was just part of an educational experience that you wanted to be exposed to more things so you could help more people. That was the heart behind that?
That was it, because we were already working with knowledge bases when it comes to the pharmacology of Chinese medicine that has the potential to advance medicine as a whole a few hundred years. But the thing about knowledge is that it's nothing unless you have power, unless you have the network to actually pull it off. Sure. And those are two different knowledge bases. You have people who are super academics, but then they can't pull off a small project. And a lot of the people I was learning from had a third grade education. But if you tell them, hey, here's this project and run with it, they're done in a month.
Right.
So
right.
it's a very different knowledge base that I had to tap into.
Yeah. So in the long run, you could like your goal now to help so many other people. I mean, beyond that, how that's fascinating though. How is that to close you're having success in your clinic?
Mm-hmm.
How was it to close that and kind of move away from that?
It was a perspective shift that needed to happen because after having done that, I'll give an example. In the last 24 hours, we signed up 100 wholesalers to carry a line of Chinese medicine products that are much higher quality in their clinics, and they'll be able to help a lot of people. The unfair competitive advantages that I have, now they have. So the catalyst that the catalyzing we just did in the last 24 hours was already more than what we could have accomplished in a lifetime in Oregon.
Yes.
So, ultimately, if your priorities are to do more, you kind of have to change your perspective.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So it was like a couple little steps backwards to launch several miles forward. Yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your experience in China, your background in how your education, that portion of it.
You mean while I was studying in China?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the aspects is that it was a bit of a difference in how Chinese medicine, natural medicine, is presented in the U.S. versus how it's presented and actually used by people who are busy and on the go. Right. Because there's an entire different class of Chinese medicine doctors who just deal with business people.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say, okay, well, you need to cut back to 20 hours a week and you need to boil up these herbs. And then you have people who are in states where they may be on a plane a lot of their life, and that may be the only time they get to sleep. And then they land and they're on the go. Right. And while they're on the go, maybe drinking is a big part of it. And they don't have the option to say, oh, you know what? I've decided to be vegan for a while. Right. I honestly, during like low or mid-level businesses, maybe you can be picky like that. But when you're meeting government officials, people who are high up in the military, you're on their time. And if they serve you something, you graciously accept it. Right. And if they're opening a special bottle of wine, no thanks, I'm going to cut back. Well, to hell with you, you're not getting a second chance.
Yes.
So then the question becomes, how do you make the best of the situation you're in? How do you find those micro pockets of time to restore yourself? How do you, take herbs while you're on the go to preserve digestion so that as you're eating all of the wrong kinds of foods, you can still be energetic, maintain that healthy gut microbiome so you can think well. And so you can be coming up with, creative, brilliant ideas that are good for the group in a state of sleep deprivation while you're hungry, because that's really when it counts. You can't always afford to be brain dead at those wee hours.
Right. You're meeting people where they are. And that's a very, a very important aspect, because we see that in our country. I mean, it's all over the world. But we see that particularly in our country, the people, they're going to do what they want to do first, and health is going to have to fit into that. And so, So what are some of the major discoveries you had comparing? Well, you had the background in the Chinese medicine as a child, but you've seen, what we see in the U.S., typical traditional medicine. And then I know you've done a good job. You're doing it. You're bridging the gap between those two. What are some of the successes you've seen in bridging the gap?
Wow. Well, right now I'm working on a project with Dr. Whalen. He's an anesthesiologist. So what we're doing is we're helping people who are CEOs, who are people who are getting fried. Because if you have, back in the day, we had these Nintendos, and if you played them for more than a few hours, they overheated.
Right.
And then, it could hurt the system. It would just black out.
Right.
And then the same thing happens with the brain. When you're in these states of busy, this long-term states of inflammation start to do neural damage. Right. So over time, the connections in the brain begin to break down. Then when you're not eating the ideal foods, you get a whole other set of problems when the gut-brain axis starts to break down. So what we've done is by using the pharmacology of herbs, I can work very closely with him. And what he does is uses low dose ketamine to drop the inflammation in the brain and start to increase the neural connections. Right. And then I come in afterwards to restore the gut and then use herbs to really regenerate some of that nervous tissue and restore those connections. So instead of somebody going, you know what, I'm on the brink of divorce, brink of losing my business, brink of just collapse, that can take you 3 months to restore just to get the inflammation down. Right. And in that time, if you don't lose your business, some really shady business partner who you thought was a good person will go in for the power grab while they see that you're down.
Well, you're
that's
struggling through.
Just the unfortunate part of it. Yeah. But with this method, people can come in within a few hours. The inflammation is down. They have the herbs and they're back on the go. And we'll even meet people at an airport somewhere. Not for the ketamine, they'll come into a clinic, but then with the herbs and everything, and then they're on the go. Because that's what we have, a center in China and then one in Albuquerque as well.
Wow, it's fantastic. Yeah. Who is your typical client? Who do you work with most?
Originally, it was Chinese government officials and business people, because they can't say, oh, you know what, I feel like I'm depressed. I feel like, that's a sign of weakness, and people will just circle them like sharks. Right. So
a big part,
right. So Dr. Whalen is also a Zen priest. So what they'll say is, you know what, I'm just getting my headspace right. I'm learning some aspects about Buddhist philosophy, whatever, which is also true. You know, you find those little micro moments of Zen in the heat of the moment, in those chaotic spaces. But then also, if they choose to, we also have these both Eastern and Western medicines to support them through that space.
Right. And I love that. When I was reading about you, you're bridging that gap to be able to, you're treating the whole person, and you're looking at basically the best of both worlds and trying to make and help people improve.
Absolutely. Because there are some therapies in Chinese medicine that are just garbage. And there are some therapies in Western medicine that are just garbage. And you have one that's hundreds of years ahead of its time in one area, and the other, you get the same thing. So
that's really, that's what we need. It's the best of both worlds colliding, and then to really treat ailments the way they should be. What are some of the biggest hurdles you've had to overcome with bringing Chinese medicine into to the U.S.?
The biggest hurdle would be the main access to distributors.
Okay.
You would think would be acupuncturists. Yeah. Right. The trouble is that a lot of acupuncture schools in the US don't teach the herbal side of things. And if they do teach the herbal side of things, they're not teaching the herbal pharmacology. This is a specific major in China, and it's a $1 trillion industry altogether. Wow. One of these, just one herbal formula in China will make about $3 billion a year.
Oh my gosh.
And the government itself puts billions into research. Right. And so there are side-by-side clinical trials. We know when the Western medicine works better. We know when the Chinese medicine works better. And we know when it's best to combine both of those. So that's the unique perspective that we're trying to share with clinicians in the U.S., both Western medicine and Chinese medicine, because this is the common ground that I feel can really advance medicine.
Right. So you have a big challenge ahead to educate people on, because to me, that is, I'm fascinated by Chinese medicine. I'm fascinated by medicine in general. But when you say that, like you are testing both and seeing which is best, but now you have to take that information and get it out to people. And so is that kind of your mission now, to try to educate people to be able to make those better health decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. We look at the products that are the most successful, the ones that have been researched in China, and we have a busy clinic. And part of the last 10 years has been also kind of market testing and seeing, okay, this works well, but is it convenient for an American person who's also crazy busy? Because you have different demographics within that, and you've got to think, okay, the busiest person who's eating garbage when they eat, how can we fit this into their lives to maximize it? Because it doesn't matter what's ideal on paper; it matters the functional reality of someone's life. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and that in that sense, so I guess being the Too Busy to Eat show, I mean, what it's really talking about is people that are really on the go. I mean, it is food, but it's also exercise. It's also, what they eat, what they drink, what they supplement. It's their sleep. So a lot of things I come in contact with, or people ask me questions, is really about their stress level. Because whether it's a business person on the go, or it's a mom with 3 kids working or not, it's just stressful. What are some of the things you see to help because you've dealt with the maximum, I mean, government officials in China, not, the height of their stress levels. I mean, that's as high as I can imagine. What are some of the things that are helpful for people that are under a tremendous amount of stress?
Well, the number one thing that I observed is that they're protecting their gut flora first and foremost. Okay. So they may spend the night drinking, but then they spend the first half of the day. A lot of businesses carried out over tea in tea houses. Okay. But even when they don't have the ability to do that, they carry small thermoses with them, and they're constantly drinking fermented teas like pu'er or oolong. And then this way they're able to reset the microbiota in the gut. So no matter what they're eating, they're able to make the best use out of it. I think that's really, really key. Yeah.
So so for someone's really stressed out, the gut flora is a big key for you. I mean, and so drinking those for the average person now, they would look into those teas. That would be the first step.
Yeah, if it's something that is going to realistically fit in with a lifestyle. Popping probiotics isn't likely to be enough, but the prebiotics in tea can help you to make use of something that's nutrient dense. So when I've been just absolutely crazy busy, I'll try to eat something that's nutrient dense but high quality, and then I'll kind of just coast by having a tea that helps me digest it over the course of a day.
Right. That's great. That makes sense. What about, I mean, really popular now, kombucha. Is that an alternative, is that an option to help or no?
Well, I'll say this. Nobody in China drinks it. There's a village. So originally, it's kind of a coastal beverage. Okay. Yeah. So literally what it means is seaweed tea. It was kind of a fermented seaweed tea. It was kind of, some villagers would use it. It's gotten very popular it's become very popular here. Yeah. Great. I can't say I know much about it because my perspective is I look at, you have China, Japan, Okinawa, Hong Kong, Singapore. These are people who have access to both worlds. And then you look at where they're spending their money. Yeah. That's where I look first. Yeah. So, on paper, I know that there are some teas that are incredible for stress. They work like antidepressants and they just, drop stress like a rock. But my perspective on this, even with evidence-based research, I can't say that it matters compared to what 1 billion people are choosing to do. I think that there's some collective wisdom in there, and that should be the first place we look. Yeah. And then afterwards look to why. Okay. At least that's the perspective I'm taking.
Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. What are those teas for you? What have you discovered? You mentioned them, but what were the teas?
So a pu'er tea, it's Pu-er. It's a kind of fermented tea that's really good for gut health. Okay. Then if people are getting stressed, they may go to an herbalist and they'll get a herbal tea that helps to drop stress hormones. Okay. And that allows them to keep their poise and, really go on. There's a company in San Francisco called Enlighten Tea, and they carry a high grade of this kind of tea. Okay. To just help people gear down their cortisol levels. Yeah. If you've been in a high stress, high stakes situation, your body betrays you. Even if you're acting as confident as you can, you're releasing micro scents that other people are going to pick up on. So you really have to physically make sure that you're in good condition, even if, whatever that takes, you have to exercise or at least get blood moving. So massage, foot soaks. While I was traveling, I had one of these stretchy rubber bands, and it was nice. It would just fit inside a very small carry-on. Sure. And then I could do exercise while I was on a plane. And then when I arrive, just the act of exercise can lower stress. So that's very important.
Absolutely. That's great. So you you take all in account to try to every means possible to combat the situation your life presents, which we can't control a lot of times. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say that there's one magic bullet, but I think that there are probably 20 small things you can do to adjust the worst chaos that comes at you in life to just take the edge off a little bit and help you to roll with it. Yeah.
Well, is there something like you see most often that you deal with? Is there a common thing?
Well, one of the, I would say that it's sleep, because as soon as we start getting burnt out, then we lose the ability to restore ourselves. It's one of the worst ironies is that it takes longer and longer to restore ourselves. And, when you're in a state where your brain is functional, it's not getting overwhelmed by inflammation, then you may be in a waiting room and, maybe you need to wait somewhere for transportation for a half hour. Yeah. You can just set your phone and sleep for a half hour, wake up refreshed and go. But how often do we really find ourselves in that state? It's pretty rare, because as we're that busy, then comes the stress, then comes the inflammation. And with that, we get the neural decay and it starts to short out our system.
Yes.
And there go our best ideas. There goes our mental endurance. There goes our memory. I mean, if you're doing business at a level and then you forget the people's names, that's a death sentence.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with thousands of people all the time. You need functional memory. So what we typically see is sleep breakdown first.
Okay.
And then once sleep breaks down, then people get into a state of depression.
Right.
And it's low-grade depression, but it changes their energy output and their efficiency.
Yeah. No, this is scary because you're describing things I've experienced in the past. So yeah. Mm-hmm. How do you help people through that stage? So they come into you, they're in that more advanced stage, or they're at the mild depression stage. What would you tell them, or how would you start to help them?
It depends on how much time they have. If they have a few weeks to fix it, I'm going to have the next couple of weeks. I may give them breath work and a formula, maybe a little acupuncture. If they have a few hours, if they have less time, and it's very important they get that turnaround, then we'll do the low-dose ketamine. It's under an anesthesiologist. Okay. And then after that, give them the tools that they can coast with. Okay.
Yeah. So you do more of an intensive, and then here we go. But ideally, it would be take the time and for long term, or do you see a difference whether it's more that intense change or that over the several weeks, the success rate, I guess?
The success rate will be about the same as long as during those 2 weeks, people can actually rest. If they're getting messages and everything, then their dopamine system will already start to derail and get their stress hormones back up again.
Okay.
So it just depends. And it's not what I suggest for people, because a lot of the people coming to see us, they know that I'm not going to tell them, well, you need to cut back to 4 hours of work a day. Because the problem is a lot of these burnout programs are developed by psychologists who work 4-hour days, telling people who only sleep for 4 hours, this is how you've got to change your life. And it's just comical.
It doesn't.
So what I look for instead is, let's say that you're at a meeting or you're talking to somebody, and who knows why, but they're talking, you know what they're going to say 5 minutes before they say it. In that space, you can start focusing in on your breath, on the space between breaths. It's a micro meditation that you can do to change your brainwave pattern into an anti-inflammatory state when it doesn't need to be on full gear.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
So people are talking. Yeah. There's a lot of wasted time in your days. Just take it. You just take it back.
So now we're at a point we have, let's say you have this, this one person that's way too busy, stressed out, having sleep problems, all this. What would be that person listening? What one step would you have them take to their health is bad, they're really stressed out. What's one step they can take to improve their health? What's that number one step?
The first and most important step, I would say, is to ask themselves this question. Do they tend to sigh more, or do they tend to yawn more? Some people will say, I don't do either, I do both all the time. So if you can't find out, then simply watch your breathing and see if your body is trying to exhale more or inhale with more force. because this is what's going to tell you what your body actually needs. Wow. If you're trying to sigh, it's a problem of distribution, not necessarily nutrition. If your body is trying to yawn, that's trying to draw blood to the internal organs. That's what we do before sleep. That means you need to nourish and power up in that way.
Right.
So it's just like any kind of supply chain. You can have a lot of shipments on the way, but it's blocked up in customs. It doesn't help you to keep ordering more inventory. It doesn't matter. It's blocked. So if you're sighing, there's a blockage. Could be an emotional blockage, could be a physical blockage. We don't care. It's just the strategy that you're going to take. If it's something that's blocked, you need to expel, get it out. So that's the time you can run it off. You can exercise it off. However, if you're stressed and you find yourself yawning more, that exercise isn't going to help you lose weight. In fact, it could increase the amount of weight that you have because the problem is supply. And that's a sign to yourself that it's time to recharge.
Okay.
That's going to be different for every person.
Yeah.
But simply asking yourself, am I yawning or am I sighing? Then you know what your body's trying to tell you to do.
That's fascinating. I love it. I love it that it's simplistic, but it's a real action step. You can get some real data to move forward. Well, that's great. Dr. Miles, I can't thank you enough. I know you're extremely busy. I'm excited that you're on the show. I thank you for taking the time, and I wish you the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much, Greg.